My assistant burst into my Harvard office yesterday afternoon, holding her phone like it contained radioactive material. Professor Summers, she said, social media is exploding with videos of Trump falling asleep at the FIFA ceremony. I looked up from the economic briefing I was reviewing and felt that familiar sinking feeling I get when misinformation meets financial markets. I'm Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary Obama's economic advisor, someone who's spent decades watching how false narratives can destabilize everything from currency markets to international relations. And what I witnessed yesterday wasn't just another viral moment. It was a masterclass in how lies travel faster than truth, while real scandals hide in plain sight. Let me be absolutely clear about this. Trump did not fall asleep at the FIFA event. I watched the entire ceremony live. The man was wide awake, unfortunately for all of us. But while millions shared fake sleeping Trump memes, something far more disturbing was happening that nobody seemed to notice. FIFA had just handed Trump a completely fabricated peace prize, and the economic implications of this institutional corruption should alarm every American, regardless of political affiliation. Here's what actually happened at the Kennedy Center and why it matters more than any viral video ever could. I've been to countless official ceremonies during my government service. Protocol matters. Institutional dignity matters. When I watched FIFA President Gianni Infantino present Trump with this so-called FIFA Peace Prize, every alarm bell in my economist brain started ringing. This wasn't just political theater. This was institutional capture in real time. Let me give you the timeline that proves this was orchestrated fraud. In October, Trump openly campaigned for the Nobel Peace Prize, leveraging the Hamas-Israel ceasefire he helped broker. When the Nobel Committee didn't bite, something interesting happened in FIFA's Geneva headquarters. Sources in the sports governance world tell me that in November, just November, FIFA's executive committee was suddenly told about this new FIFA Peace Prize for football unity. According to New York Times reporting, even senior FIFA board members and vice presidents were surprised by the announcement. This wasn't years in the making. This was rushed through in weeks. Why would FIFA's president risk his organization's credibility for this stunt? The answer is economic, and it should terrify anyone who understands how international institutions actually work. The 2026 World Cup represents roughly $6 billion in economic activity for the United States, Mexico, and Canada. FIFA needs Trump's cooperation on everything from visa policies to infrastructure coordination to security arrangements. In essence, Infantino mortgaged FIFA's institutional independence to ensure the tournament's success. This is textbook corruption disguised as diplomacy. I've seen this pattern before during the Asian financial crisis of 1997. When institutions abandon their core principles to curry favor with political leaders, the entire system becomes unstable. What starts as accommodation becomes dependence. What starts as cooperation becomes subordination. But let's talk about that viral sleeping Trump story because it perfectly illustrates how misinformation works in our current media ecosystem. Within 2 hours of the ceremony ending, doctored videos were circulating showing Trump apparently nodding off during Infantino's speech. The editing was sophisticated, carefully cut to remove context and create a narrative that fit people's preconceptions. I watched the raw footage from multiple angles. Trump was alert throughout, unfortunately maintaining his usual expression of barely concealed boredom with anything that isn't explicitly about him, but he wasn't asleep. The fake sleeping story spread faster than the real story about FIFA's institutional corruption because it was more entertaining. People wanted to believe it. It fed into existing narratives about Trump's attention span and respect for international institutions. Meanwhile, the actual scandal, a major international sports organization creating a fake award to please a political leader, barely registered in the news cycle. This is how democracy dies, not with dramatic moments, but with institutional erosion that happens while everyone's distracted by viral content. Let me explain the deeper economic implications, because this FIFA decision represents something much larger than sports politics. When international institutions start customizing their behavior to accommodate individual political leaders, the entire framework of global governance begins to break down. Think about what message this sends to other world leaders. If FIFA will create fake awards for Trump, what will other international organizations do to maintain access to American markets? Will the International Olympic Committee start handing out special recognition to secure U.S. hosting rights? Will the World Trade Organization begin customizing its rulings to avoid American retaliation? This is how institutional credibility evaporates, and once it's gone, it takes decades to rebuild. I witnessed this phenomenon during my Treasury days when various international financial institutions would modify their standards to accommodate politically powerful member nations. The short-term benefits were always temporary, but the long-term damage to institutional integrity was permanent. FIFA's decision yesterday follows this exact pattern. They gained Trump's favor and likely secured cooperation for the 2026 World Cup. But they lost something more valuable, their independence and credibility as a neutral international organization. The ceremony itself was designed as pure political theater. The village people performed YMCA, Trump's unofficial anthem. Andrea Bocelli sang, one of Trump's favorite performers. The draw assistants included Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky, and Shaquille O'Neal, American sports legends with no connection to soccer, but massive appeal to Trump's base. This wasn't a soccer event. This was a Trump rally disguised as an international ceremony hosted at the Kennedy Center, an institution that was specifically designed to be apolitical, but has been transformed into Trump's personal stage since he took over as board chair. Here's what really concerns me from an economic perspective. Andrew Giuliani, Rudy's son, is running something called the White House FIFA World Cup Task Force. Giuliani literally referred to yesterday's event as the MAGA FIFA World Cup draw. They're not even pretending this is about sports anymore. When political movements begin absorbing international institutions like this, it creates what economists call systemic risk. The boundaries between politics, economics, and international cooperation start to blur in dangerous ways. I've been analyzing the guest list and financial flows around this event, and the patterns are troubling. Major donors to Trump's political operations were given premium seating. Corporate sponsors with business before federal regulators received VIP access. This wasn't just institutional capture, it was monetization of international relations. The fake Peace Prize represents the culmination of a year-long courtship between Infantino and Trump. Infantino attended the Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt back in October, publicly stating that Trump deserved the Nobel Peace Prize for the ceasefire agreement. When that didn't materialize, FIFA simply created their own award. It's like when you don't get invited to the cool kids party, so you throw your own party and declare yourself prom king. Except this is a major international institution that's supposed to serve global soccer, not American political theater. But here's where the economics get really concerning. FIFA's decision to create this award wasn't made in isolation. It's part of a broader pattern where international organizations are being forced to choose between their institutional integrity and their access to American markets. The 2026 World Cup will be the largest sporting event in history, with matches across 3 countries and economic impact reaching into the tens of billions. FIFA cannot afford to alienate the U.S. government, so they created a fake award to keep Trump happy. This dynamic is playing out across multiple international institutions. Organizations that should be politically neutral are instead becoming platforms for whoever holds power in Washington. And that's dangerous for global stability. I had a conversation yesterday with a former colleague who now works in international sports governance. Larry, he said, we're all walking on eggshells. Every decision has to be filtered through political considerations. It's paralyzing. This is exactly what institutional capture looks like. When organizations stop making decisions based on their core mission and start making decisions based on political calculations, they lose their effectiveness and legitimacy. The Trump administration has been systematically placing loyalists in leadership positions across international organizations where the U.S. has influence. The Kennedy Center Board chairmanship was just one piece of a larger strategy to transform supposedly neutral institutions into political platforms. Meanwhile, the fake Trump sleeping story continues to dominate social media while the real scandal gets buried. This perfectly illustrates the information warfare that's reshaping American democracy. Viral misinformation crowds out serious institutional analysis. People shared sleeping Trump memes because they were entertaining. Nobody shared stories about FIFA institutional corruption because it was complicated and depressing. But which story actually matters for the future of international cooperation and democratic governance? Let me connect this to broader economic trends, because FIFA's decision yesterday reflects a global shift toward what economists call transactional multilateralism. International institutions are increasingly seen not as neutral arbiters, but as assets to be captured and leveraged for national or political gain. China has been pursuing this strategy for years, using economic leverage to influence international organizations. Now we're seeing the same approach from the Trump administration, just with different methods. The difference is that Chinese influence often works through financial pressure, investment, loans, market access. American influence under Trump works through a combination of market access, regulatory pressure, and personal charm offensives like yesterday's FIFA ceremony. Both approaches undermine the institutional independence that makes international cooperation possible. When every institution becomes an extension of national political power, genuine multilateral problem solving becomes impossible. I'm particularly concerned about the precedent this sets for other international organizations. FIFA may be about sports, but the same dynamics apply to institutions that handle everything from trade disputes to climate policy to nuclear security. If major international organizations start customizing their behavior to please individual political leaders, the entire framework of global governance could collapse. We've seen this pattern before in history, usually in the lead up to major conflicts. The irony is that while millions of people shared fake videos of Trump sleeping, they missed the real story of institutional democracy being put to sleep by political corruption. FIFA's independence didn't die dramatically. It died quietly with applause and a manufactured peace prize. This is exactly how democratic institutions erode, not through violent coups or dramatic confrontations, but through 1,000 small accommodations that seem reasonable in isolation, but collectively undermine the system's integrity. What happened yesterday at the Kennedy Center wasn't just about sports or politics. It was about the fundamental question of whether international institutions can maintain their independence in an era of rising authoritarianism and political polarization. The fake peace prize Trump received was real. The sleeping story was fake. But the institutional damage done by yesterday's ceremony will outlast any viral video. The question now is whether other international organizations will learn from FIFA's mistake or whether they'll follow the same path of institutional capture for short-term political gain. Based on what I've seen in my decades of public service, I'm not optimistic. When the choice is between principle and access, most institutions choose access. And that's how democracies die, not with a bang, but with a whimper and a fabricated peace prize. Let me share a telling example. During my Treasury years, I watched the Asian Development Bank slowly bend its lending standards to accommodate political pressure from major donor countries. It started with small accommodations, adjusted timelines here, relaxed requirements there. Within 5 years, the entire institutional framework had been compromised. The same dynamic is now playing out with FIFA, but more publicly. Yesterday's Peace Prize wasn't isolated. It was the culmination of months of systematic institutional capture. I've been reviewing FIFA's governance changes from this past year, and the patterns are disturbing. Decision-making has been concentrated in Infantino's office. Board oversight weakened. Transparency requirements relaxed. These aren't coincidences. They're systematic preparations for abandoning institutional independence. The business community should be particularly concerned. When international institutions become political tools, it creates enormous uncertainty for global commerce. How can corporations plan investments when rules change based on political calculations? A CEO whose company sponsors major events told me yesterday, "Larry, if FIFA can create fake awards for political leaders, what other standards are they willing to compromise?" That's exactly the right question. From a macroeconomic perspective, we're witnessing breakdown of what economists call institutional complementarity, the way organizations work together to create stable frameworks for global cooperation. When FIFA compromises independence, it affects the broader ecosystem of international cooperation that underpins economic stability. The 2026 World Cup represents $20 billion in economic impact across 3 countries. All that activity depends on FIFA maintaining credibility as a neutral organization. Yesterday's fake Peace Prize introduced systematic risk into this entire ecosystem. Professor Susan Rose Ackerman at Yale, who studies international corruption, told me, "The FIFA Peace Prize represents exactly the kind of institutional capture that undermines global governance. Once an organization demonstrates it will create fake awards for political leaders, its credibility in all areas becomes suspect." This isn't academic theory. Real consequences flow from credibility problems. When institutions lose independence, it becomes harder to resolve disputes, coordinate policies, and maintain stable frameworks for global commerce. Think about the next World Cup host selection. Will countries trust FIFA's process, or will they assume political considerations, not objective criteria, determine outcomes? The same questions now apply to every FIFA decision. But FIFA isn't unique. Across the international system, similar pressures are building. When institutions make decisions based on political calculations rather than core missions, the entire framework of international cooperation begins collapsing. I lived through the breakdown of financial cooperation in the 1990s. I watched how quickly stable systems become chaotic when institutional credibility erodes. The signs are all there again, but the scale is much larger. What we need is for someone to stand up and say institutional independence matters more than short-term political gain. FIFA's board should reverse yesterday's decision and admit it was a mistake. Other organizations should learn from FIFA's error rather than repeat it. But the incentives all point toward more institutional capture, not less. Political leaders want compliant organizations. Organizations want continued access and funding. Ordinary citizens who depend on neutral institutions suffer. Yesterday's ceremony perfectly captured our moment. Fake Peace Prize equals real institutional corruption. viral sleeping story equals fake news distraction. While everyone focused on entertainment value of supposed presidential napping, democracy itself was quietly falling asleep. The question is whether we'll wake up in time to save institutional independence or continue being distracted by viral content while democratic frameworks collapse around us.